I don't like it, Milosh said, staring at the black hole of the tunnel system's entrance that looked like a giant reptile's throat. Not that I'm claustrophobic, but I don't like caves, especially not here on Jericho. Come on, Chong said, pulling up the straps of his backpack. A little buzzing and whistling is no big deal. Think about what's waiting for us when we find Sorenson. 100 pounds of crystal mushroom spores is enough to stop this endless tramping all over the Federation. He glanced back at the shuttle some distance away, from which Wanda was just getting out. "What's up?" he asked her. Wanda looked at the small scanner screen attached to her forearm. The signal is weak, of course. No wonder, going through that thick rock. But still, the bearing is stable. The problem is, we don't have a map, so we're pretty much guessing our way through. Well, if Sorenson got up there, then we will too, Chang said. What if he was trapped by a rock slide, Milosh asked. We will chisel with a pickaxe? There are no rock slides on Jericho. Wanda looked at Milosh as if he were a retard. These are not natural caves. Or have you changed your mind? We'll gladly split your share. Milosh looked at the gloomy hole in the black-red rocky slope. Of course, Wanda was joking about sharing his share of the spores. After all, he'd been the one who'd gotten the info where Sorenson had crashed his ship. Instead of hauling the small cargoes, which no self-respecting galactic freighter would ever take on, and which was just enough to cover operating expenses, the partners and owners of the starship Rosinante had a chance to make a big score at once. 100 pounds of crystal mushrooms could easily fetch more than 10 million unicredits. Milosh sighed. I still don't like it, he repeated. Sorenson didn't return from there. What could have happened to him? Chang shrugged nonchalantly. That's what we'll find out, he said. I think he just went out there without a scanner and got lost. Are we going or not? The tunnel entrance loomed above them like a giant mouth frozen in an eternal yawn. The planet Jericho was discovered about 150 years ago, a completely unremarkable Earth-type world with 3 continents and a temperate climate. Such worlds were abundant in the galaxy, and Jericho was so far from any inhabited places that no one desired to colonize it. However, interest in the planet arose for the same reason it received its biblical name. Almost all of its crust was penetrated by a network of tunnels of incredible complexity, clearly of artificial origin. There was a constant air movement in the tunnels, and an astonishing pipe organ of planetary proportions sounded. Somewhere, it was a howl. Somewhere, it was a whistle. Somewhere, it was a barely audible whisper. It was the missionary ship of the Catholic Academy of New Rome that discovered the planet. The captain called the planet Jericho. The missionaries had no use for the planet, since it had no population to baptize and bring them the word of God, so they took a short glimpse of the tunnels and flew away, listing the planet in the Universal Registry. Then the Federation's long conflict with the Sulpadians began, and everybody got more urgent matters on their hands than the distant, enigmatic wonders. There were enough artifacts of the precursors in the galaxy, and all of them were stranger and more incomprehensible than one another. Jericho was safely forgotten. It remained forgotten until pirates damaged Jan Sorenson's ship, which was trading with the miners of Electra, and Sorenson landed on the planet. The ship carried nearly 2,000 pounds of crystal mushrooms, a tidy sum for any thug. The bandits were on his tail, so Sorenson loaded as much of the precious merchandise into his backpack as he could and went into the tunnels. His hopes paid off in one respect. The pirates were too lazy to follow him into the labyrinths of Jericho. They decided they were good enough with what they had, took all the mushrooms from Sorenson's ship, and flew away, blowing up the merchant ship to cover their tracks. The pirates were pinned down and boarded by the patrol a few months later. But Sorenson didn't even live to see the disappointment of being unable to get off the planet, disappearing into the tunnels without a trace. The patrol flew to Jericho and found the remains of Sorenson's ship, but found no trace of its owner and left. 6 months had passed since the crash, and the chances of Sorenson still being alive were nil. As it always goes, all documents and reports on the Sorenson case were instantly drowned in the bottomless archives of the patrol, until a couple of years later. They were dug up by a distant relative of Milosh, who worked in the organization. That's how Milosh, Wanda, and Chong ended up on Jericho. "It's not so bad," Chong said, adjusting the collar of his laryngophone. "I thought it would be one hell of a noise." "Jericho's tunnels are barely explored," Wanda replied. "The missionaries landed on another continent and haven't gotten into the system much. The papacy had not yet decided which department originated the precursors, divine providence or its antagonists. The few people who have been in the tunnels say that it's as luck would have it, and the environment can change. But no one had really gone deep into the tunnels." They had been walking for the second hour, and so far they had not encountered anything more severe than the shrill whistle that suddenly struck them at one of the crossroads. It was more unexpected than unpleasant, and the laryngophones and active noise-canceling headphones seemed an unnecessary precaution. Nevertheless, the Jericho tunnels could not be called quiet. Of course, the Resonance crew members had no special speleological experience, but each had visited some caves on different worlds once or twice. The farther away from the entrance, the quieter it was. That was the general rule. Here, however, things were very different. There were whistles, rustles, and strange noises, like distant cries of some animals or even indistinct phrases in fish language, despite Jericho's tunnels being completely devoid of fauna. "It's still kind of spooky," Milosh said. "These sounds give me the creeps. The sooner we get out of here, the better." Chang snorted. "Stop whining. There's no monsters here, for God's sake." He looked at Wanda. "But I agree with him. Wandering around for hours doesn't feel like much fun. Some bloody maze. Where the hell is Sorenson? I thought we were supposed to make a quick run and get the loot. But how long do we have to hang around?" Wanda shook her head. "It's still a little over 5 clicks away, but there are no straight lines here. The scanner only shows a bearing on Sorenson's hyperbeacon. We have to find our way through the tunnels ourselves. No one's ever mapped this part of Jericho. We're the first ones here. By the way, we might even be able to sell the scanner footage to a university. Not much compared to crystal mushrooms, but money is money." "That's right," Chang nodded. "So let's hurry up, before our chicken friend shits his pants." And he strode forward. Milosh was not offended. He knew that Chang's ostentatious bravado and rudeness were just a mask to cover the same insecurity and fear. The tunnels of Jericho were quite unlike any natural cave system found on any planet. Almost circular in cross-section, about 20 feet in diameter, they looked like they had been burned through the rock by some gigantic glowing worm. The walls were covered with strange protrusions, smoothly undulating into each other, evoking unpleasant associations with the entrails of an animal. The realization that the network of tunnels entangled the entire planet only added to the uncertainty. It was like many, even excellent swimmers, could feel uncomfortable on the ocean's surface several miles deep. Once in a while, the tunnels led out into spacious halls, each with several entrances. There were also dead ends, usually ending in a smaller grotto. As the party moved deeper into the labyrinth, a red grid of explored tunnels appeared on the scanner screen, gradually growing toward the green dot of the Sorenson hyperbeacon. Gradually, the noise in the tunnels grew louder. So far, the whistling, howling, and other strange sounds created by air movement along the protrusions on the walls, though Milosh could not say he felt any strong wind, were tolerable. The slowly intensifying noise even came in handy, as it drowned out Chong's incessant nervous chatter, which didn't stop for a moment. Now Chang was walking behind, 30 paces behind Wanda and Milosh, and was constantly telling jokes, poking fun at his partners, telling some fantastic and ridiculous stories from his life, and even occasionally belting out a song from his Docker past. His musicianship was at level 0, so from Milosh's point of view, there wasn't much difference between Chang's singing and the noise in the tunnels. At some point, they had to finally put on their headphones, turn on the active noise canceling, and switch to laryngophone communication. The wind gusts became stronger, and the noises in the tunnels became a deafening roar in which, nevertheless, individual tones and sounds could be discerned from time to time. The red grid was inexorably approaching the coveted green marker, and even Chong stopped joking, obviously crushed by the growing tension. At last, the tunnel ended with an exit into the hall, and in the light of the powerful flashlights, Milosh saw what they had come for. Sorenson was lying under the wall, his head resting on a bulky backpack. The Jericho tunnels were dry and sterile, almost like in a surgery room. So Sorenson's body was not decomposed. It dried up into a mummy, like the ones Milosh had seen in the historical museum on Gilgamesh 2, where they'd been stuck for 3 months because of a hyperdrive malfunction. As they approached, Milosh carefully pulled the backpack out from under the dead man's head and peered inside. The backpack was stuffed almost to the brim with neat rectangular briquettes, vacuum packs of crystal mushroom spores. Jesus! Wanda's squeezed voice came through the headphones before Milosh could say anything. Look at this. Milosh raised his head and looked where the beam of Wanda's flashlight was pointing. Sorenson had obviously spent a lot of time in this room before death gifted him its final mercy. The wall, for several dozen paces in either direction, was covered with inscriptions, strange diagrams, and drawings. Sorenson scratched the letters and lines into the hard rock with a knife, and when the blade was worn down almost to the hilt, he used steel buckles from his clothes and backpack. Their remnants were lying around on the floor. Milosh immediately imagined the room of a madman, as they are portrayed in Hollow movies. Indecipherable writings crawled on top of each other, the essence of surrealistic drawings barely visible through the chaos of frantic strokes. Crooked, asymmetrical mandalas covered most of the wall, with some mathematical formulas and scraps of words squeezed between them. Poor guy, Milosh said. But I can understand him. Getting lost in this place with all this noise, it's hard not to go mad. Indeed, the roar was so loud now that it was even partly breaking through the active noise reduction. If it hadn't been for the throat mics, they would have had to communicate by gesture or write notes to each other. Wanda scrutinized Sorenson's work. Something's not right here, she said, pointing to a wall section. It's not just nonsense. It's some kind of frequency calculation. Looks like Sorenson was trying to pick something out of the sounds of Jericho. Milosh stepped closer and took a closer look, but the formulas didn't catch his eye. It was the scrawled phrase, "He won't let me out. He's interested." Poor Sorenson, he thought, completely flew off the handle. Where's Chang? Wanda suddenly asked. Milosh looked around. Indeed, Chang was nowhere to be seen. Obviously, he had fallen behind at some point and turned the wrong way. Chang! 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 They shouted for several minutes, to no avail. The weak radio signals couldn't penetrate the rock. Nothing could penetrate it except the signal of a hyperbeacon. But Chang didn't have one. A hyperbeacon, strictly speaking, was not designed for hiking. It was a navigational emergency device. Sorenson had taken it out of the ship while running from the pirates, hoping that somebody would eventually find him. Well, they did. Sort of. He has a scanner, Wanda finally said. It can be tuned to both Sorenson's beacon and the shuttles. He'll get out on his own. We can't look for him now. It would take forever. Milosh hesitated. On the one hand, giving up so easily on his lost comrade felt a betrayal. On the other, he knew that Wanda was right. Chang was not a little boy lost in the forest next door, and he had a scanner with a schematic that would quickly lead him out of the tunnels. Milosh dropped his backpack on the floor next to Sorenson's body. "Let's load the stuff," he said. "It'll be a little heavy for two, but we can manage. And then maybe Chang will show up." The howl seemed to lower in pitch and subside a little. Nevertheless, preoccupied with packing the mushrooms as evenly as possible into the backpack, Milosh realized they were being shot at only when the bullet broke off a large chunk of rock near his head. It took another moment for Milosh to understand what was happening, and then he picked up his backpack and rushed toward the nearest tunnel entrance. "Wanda, run!" He hoped that Wanda wouldn't hesitate. There was no time for explanations. Ducking into the tunnel, Milosh turned off the flashlight and pressed himself against the wall so that one of the hillocks would shield him from the gunman. The beam of light slid down the tunnel entrance and went farther away. Chong had obviously lost him. "Wanda!" "I'm all right." A woman's voice came through the headphones, then immediately fell silent. Chong could hear their conversation and could figure out where they were hiding. What to do? Milosh didn't have a weapon. It had never occurred to him to take it into Jericho's lifeless tunnels. Chang was the only one who carried a gun everywhere, justifying it as a habit developed during the Hopper Station Dockers riots. "Chang, are you crazy?" Wanda asked. "You're not a pilot. You can't leave Jericho without us. What's gotten into you?" No response. Only the beam of the flashlight fiercely stroked the walls of the hall. "Chang, do you copy? Drop the gun and calm down." Shots rang out again. Milosh suddenly froze. He actually heard gunshots, muffled by the noise suppressors but perfectly distinct. And it felt like... He carefully removed the massive headphones. There was complete silence in the tunnels, broken only by Chong's footsteps and his incessant muttering. "Everyone will stay here, everyone. All of them. Of us, of them. Here, 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 here. There is no way out. There is no way out. There is no way out. No, no, no." "Chang," shouted Milosh, hoping the echo would hide his location. In the sudden silence, the sound rang out under the vaults of the hall. Milosh cautiously peered out. The flashlight beam whirled in all directions as Chong began to look around. More gunshots rumbled, turned by the echoes into thunderous reverberations. It seemed to Milosh that the thunderclaps did not subside, but became a low rumble somewhere on the edge of audibility, making his heart ache and giving him goosebumps. "Ah!" The half-cry, half-moan was filled with such pain that Milosh flinched and, against his will, looked out again. Chang lay curled up in the middle of the hall in a bright spot of light from Wanda's flashlight, who was standing at the entrance to another tunnel in which she had recently been hiding. "He must have run out of ammunition," Wanda said. "I was counting. He always carried only 2 clips. Milosh took a few steps toward Chong. "What's wrong with him? Did you take him out?" Wanda shook her head. "No, I don't know. He seems to have gone crazy too, like Sorenson." Milosh smirked sarcastically. "Or just decided to take it all for himself." He took a few more steps forward. "Shit, I don't feel so good," he said, feeling nauseous and heavy in his chest. "It's not every day I get shot at, you know." He wanted to walk over to Chong and check on him, but suddenly he bent in half and threw up. A wave of black despair and fear rose up from somewhere in the depths of his consciousness, almost crushing his will. Milosh felt his knees buckle. "This way, Milosh!" Wanda's shout pulled him out of the mire for a second. Milosh thought he was running like hell for this shout, though Wanda said later that he staggered like a blind drunk. "Let's get out of here, quick." Milosh, as if through a cloudy glass, saw Wanda's face distorted with fear and excitement. To Where? Wait. 5 minutes? He had to rest. Immediately. Lie down here against the wall. It's so comfortable. Wait. I'm just a little... There was already someone lying against the wall. That's great. They'll rest together. The flashlight beam struck the person lying there, and Milosh looked at the skinny skull of a mummy. The hazy bubble that had enveloped Milosh's consciousness burst. He staggered, but still kept himself on his feet and looked at Wanda. Let's go. But you'll have to help me. I'm a little out of shape. You know, the scientific prize can be much more than just a cartographer's payment, said Wanda. So many people have been to Jericho, and not one guessed what it was. Everybody thought it was just another useless precursor gimmick. No big deal. Tens of thousands are all over the galaxy. We got half the loot, Milosh said. Even without the prize, it's a decent sum, especially since we'll be splitting it between the two of us now. They were sitting in the wardroom of the Rocinante, which Wanda had just put into hyperjump to Mycenae, the nearest Federation world. I feel sorry about Chong, Wanda said. He wasn't such a bad guy after all. But ironically, we'd all still be there if it weren't for him, like Sorenson. Milosh stretched and immediately grimaced in pain. His whole body still ached, down to the last muscle. As I view it, if anyone should be thanked, it's you. You were the one who realized what was going on in time, even though we both saw the Sorensons' scribbles. Wanda shrugged it off. I think you would have figured it out too, if you'd had a little more time. We were lucky that Chong started shooting in all directions. It drew attention to him, and he was the first to get hit. The infrasound attack. Milosh shook his head. You know, that was the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. I'll never set foot on this damn planet again. And you were only the collateral hit, Wanda remarked. Chang was the focus of the attack. I felt something too, but it didn't hit me as hard, and then I got it. Most of Sorenson's writing was too illegible to make anything out, but something suddenly made sense. 7 hertz, 12 hertz, 20 hertz, resonant frequencies that depress the psyche, make you seasick, and affect the heart. I didn't even know that, Milosh said. It was just some random numbers to me. He was quiet for a moment. Holy crap, an acoustic computer the size of a planet with an infrasound immune system. You can't think of anything like that. It was in Sorenson's notes, too. Wanda said, I managed to capture some of it. These alleged mandalas are his attempts to draw a schematic of such a computer. Primitive, of course. I think by that moment he was totally crazy from exhaustion and despair. Jericho wouldn't let him out, stopping him with infrasound. He probably wanted to study him further, because anything that makes noise to Jericho is like an infection or parasite. The problem was that Sorenson was hardly giving him much information, except that maybe he started talking to himself towards the end. Jericho can only perceive sound. That's why he reacted to us, especially Chong. Milosh nodded. Jokes, songs, and then the shooting. Damn, it wasn't some crappy bacteria. I bet for Jericho, it felt like a real sonic beef tapeworm. Yeah, it's hard to imagine how an acoustic computer the size of a planet could work. How does it regulate sound? What does it do? What does it know about the world around it? It's always like that with precursor artifacts. Wanda stared pensively at the ceiling and suddenly giggled. Milosh looked at her questioningly. You know, I've been many things in my life, Wanda said. Student, waitress, Star Academy cadet, pilot, hustler, nurse, wife, lover. 1,000 different roles. She chuckled once more. But I've never been a microscopic migraine inducer before.